Which countries around the world are welcoming towards crypto and blockchain innovation? How can we help advance these technologies both home and abroad? That's the mission of Sheila Warren, CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation. Formerly the head of blockchain at the World Economic Forum, Sheila lives, breathes, eats, and sleeps unlocking the promise of Web3. Today, we discuss how America is falling behind and reveal which countries are doing a great job of stimulating innovation. As a lawyer, Sheila's got a lot of words, and they're all really smart. So come listen to Smart Words, dunk on America, and feel optimistic about where things are headed in the brave new blockchain world on episode number 681 of the Bad Crypto Podcast.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition.
Who's bad?
And you are in league with the blockchain blockheads, the nifty nerds, the Web3 weenies, the metaverse morons. Joel Comm and Travis Wright here for another episode of the Bad Crypto Podcast. Hello, Sir Lord Travis.
We're the regulation rejects.
We didn't have an hour. That's a good one. We have crypto clowns. We got DeFi, DoFi, GameFi goobers. That's a good one.
Right. It's good. Yeah. Well, we just keep adding on the Web3 weirdos. We're all of those things. And this right here, folks, is a really interesting episode because we have Sheila Warren back. Originally, she led blockchain regulation and just innovation for the World Economic Forum. She wisened up and it's like, I got to get away from Klaus, this guy. I don't know if that's not the case or not, but she left out. She is now head of the Crypto Innovation Council. And this interview right here is pretty solid, Joel.
You're going to want to listen to every last morsel of it. And afterwards, we're going to tell you how you can get an NFT commemorating this episode. So let's listen in. It was just about 3 years ago that our guest today was last on the show. And at that time, she was the head of blockchain for the World Economic Forum, where she occasionally interfaces with the Klaus Schwab. You will eat the bugs and you will be happy. And she is now with the Crypto Council for Innovation. She is the CEO, and her name is still Sheila Warren. Sheila, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Joel and Travis.
Yeah, you weren't happy with the idea of eating the bugs, no?
The time had come for a change. It had been almost 5 years, and I really wanted to be at a place where I could always say what I truly, truly thought, which, as you know, I didn't really hesitate to do at the forum. I got a long leash there, but I wanted to be more of an advocate than I felt I was able to be in an organization that's objective, that's actually officially objective.
Very nice. Yeah. So now, so this is cool. So you got the cryptoforinovation.org?
Crypto Council for Innovation. It's cryptocouncil.org. Same Twitter handle as I always had, at Sheila_Warren. But yeah, I've been in this role now for a little over a year. And we are an evidence-based advocacy organization that's focusing on trying to get sound crypto policy around the world. I mean, really. So it isn't really that different, I think, from what my goals were in previous roles, even predating the forum, just trying to get responsible policy in place. But the strategy I can use now is obviously very different.
Do you feel like your hands were somewhat tied with the WEF where, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to eat an elephant, right? You're monitoring and changing policy all around the world. You're not just like, Caitlin Long and saying, all right, let's do Wyoming. You're like, let's go everywhere. And so does this offer you more, freedom and liberty to do what you want to do?
Yes and no, right? Because I think here the connections that so that's a really interesting question. I love that you asked that. So the answer is always complicated, and I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm never going to give you a yes or no answer. But it is yes and no. It's yes from the standpoint of I truly believe that crypto governance, crypto economics, the blockchain are all going to underlie most of our systems moving forward. But I think the connection with other systems is actually even more important now than it ever was. And a lot of crypto folks only want to talk about crypto all the time. That's it, right? So I think the way that we make the case for why crypto is so important, and this has been successful globally, is by connecting it to a variety of other systems, pointing out other uses of the blockchain, pointing out where legacy systems are not really working or where friction is a problem, these kinds of things. And the crypto community doesn't necessarily have appetite for that kind of longer term strategy always. So in a way, and that's very much what the forum focused on, right? They were always like big systems thinking, how do systems work? How are they, but they were maybe less interested in like the crypto part of it. So I've kind of traded one for the other, but I am me, and that's the way I think. I always think bigger picture, holistic, what's going on with systems, where are we making change, what needs to be fixed, like all those kinds of things. So I bring all that sensibility to the table. It isn't necessarily always celebrated by folks in crypto the way I wish it were, but I truly believe this is the way that we make the case. And it's the only way I think we're actually going to make the case in a way that's going to be sticky to the people that we're trying to influence, which are policymakers, right? We want them to understand what's at stake here, what's at stake for how many people, how big this community is, how global it is, how many people this innovation is already impacting and can impact going forward. And the only way I think to do that, like I said, is to really connect that to a lot of other things that maybe are outside the tunnel vision of people in crypto.
So that's a really unique challenge that you have there, right? I watched some of the, the Facebook congressional hearings that they had, and one of the guys was like, "So if I'm on the Facebook, does that mean I'm on the internet?" I'm like, "Wow, these guys are not so bright." And they're the ones that's legislating and regulating, and I'm hating over here. I'm like, "Wow, this is bad." Even the thing around TikTok, the dude was like, "So if I have Wi-Fi on, is TikTok on my internet?" And dude, I'm like, "Wow, dude, what?" Like, I think what he meant to say was, if you're on my Wi-Fi with TikTok, are you accessing my other devices? But he kind of said it weird. And so it was it's like, these people are not the most tech savvy in the world. Most of them are attorneys, whereas Congress back in the day used to be, oh, here's some scientists, here's some doctors, here's some attorneys, here's some businessmen. Now it's like 90% attorneys, and most of them have an additional passport to Israel. So it's like, most of these people who are running our things aren't necessarily caring about the U.S. citizen as much as the whole global scene. And so it seems like they're trying to regulate things in a way that maybe is not good for America long term. Like Joel and I have been talking about this for a long time. I think the next Silicon Valley will not be in America because they're going to leave because they're too strong with the regulations. We're already hearing Coinbase saying, "Hey, we're going to internationally expand. We don't trust being here." Bittrex, we're out. You're an American citizen. We're done. Gemini saying the same thing. "Hey, we're going to expand internationally." All of these crypto companies are leaving America. How do we solve this?
So you raise a lot there, Travis, and I'm going to I'll give you a couple of my observations over years of working globally, right? So my last 2 roles have been extremely global. I've been working all over the world with various governments, various sectors, right? So I worked with civil society for a long time. Then I worked with government and industry for a long time. And now I still work with government and industry. And I still have, eyes and ears in a lot of places in the world. And there is a uniqueness to the American political system that is not shared in other places, right? So I was on a call just this morning with someone in London who's observing that she is Australian, lives in Britain, but she's like, look, in Britain, like most people in parliament, there's a technical advisor. Maybe they themselves are not computer scientists, but they have like a technical advisor. And that person's job is to kind of go in and figure out like, what is this newfangled technology? Of course, not everyone knows everything, but there is an understanding that you need to be getting guidance that you trust from someone who's on your payroll, on your staff, and not just getting it from outside, right? In the American political system, you're right. I mean, I'm a lawyer myself and I love lawyers, but it is a lot of lawyers. And the politics of our system, politics are complicated everywhere in the world. I mean, look no further than the British Parliament to see like bananas activity, right? I mean, this is all over the world. Like politics are politics. What is a politician's goal? It's twofold. It's to get reelected and to do right by their citizens. And doing right by citizens is in service of getting elected. I think a lot of people run for office with very lofty goals and ideas about how much they're going to be able to change, and then realize the system makes it very hard to do that. So I think that there's no understanding of Washington specifically in tech. Like there's just really, really limited understanding, particularly in crypto or in Web3, about like how Washington functions, what it is, what people know, what they don't know, et cetera. And similarly, there isn't the same access to information in Washington, to tech that there is in other countries. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But that's not echoed in other places. I mean, the premier of Bermuda is like a CS grad, right? He like codes in his free time. I mean, there's a very different sensibility. In Dubai, like a lot of the sheiks actually like get in there and code. Like they do class, they understand this stuff in a different way. Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, like all over Europe. So we are unique in this way and not in a good way. Now, that being said, that's what the system that we have. The system that we have is the system that we have. And if we want to ensure that this innovation keeps its edge in the United States, we need to work with the people that we have, right? There's many people who are out there trying to get a different set of people elected and all of that. And look, that's all well and good. That's not happening for another couple of years. This is a cycle we're in. We have elections on a cycle. We're not a country that has coups. I mean, thank God, at least not yet, right? Like that's not a thing. So people have to get elected. They get elected by actual citizens. Citizens vote on the things they care about. So it's like, who cares about crypto? People that use crypto. We have to expand that set. And it can't just be people that are like, oh, I have a wallet and like 10 years ago, not 10 years ago, 3 years ago, I got one NFT because a friend of mine had a party. It has to be people that actually understand what is at stake here and what the broader goals of what we're all trying to do is. And that is not easy. And I think one of the challenges is that in the United States, I'm speaking kind of prior to like CCI and my tenure here and all of that, because I wasn't paying a lot of attention in the United States, frankly, in policy. I was looking really at a lot of other parts of the world in my previous role. I wasn't really doing much, if at anything, in the United States, to be very clear, right? So, I think there's a lot of credit we owe to folks that were actually paying attention in the US and realizing that someone had to be minding the store. But we were always leading with the technology. Oh, it's so elegant. Oh, it's so complicated. Oh, it's, nobody cares, man. Like nobody cares. What they care about is like, what does it do? What does it do? How does it help? What problem is it solving? What's the use case? Does anybody else care about it, right? So one thing lobbed at people a lot now who are going into Washington talking about crypto is, oh my gosh, well, if crypto mattered, it'd be like ChatGPT. Look at ChatGPT. Within like 5 seconds, 10 zillion people were using it for this and that. And it's so, it's like, well, of course, that's because the technology is not actually that complicated. These are interfaces really simple, right? And you're not asking people to engage in massive change management that's expensive around their back end, which is kind of what you need if you really want to super effectively use a blockchain. But also look at NFTs. Those things went super, like they got pick up really, really fast, right? As an example. So to some extent, the more complicated in a way, the interface on the technology, the harder it is for people to actually engage with it and the less likely they are to do so. So a bunch of us have been saying for 5 or 6 years now, until you get this to be more user-friendly, more obvious, et cetera, you have a barrier to engagement with it that you just don't see in something like a ChatGPT. But that's being used now as like, quote, evidence that, oh, this stuff can't possibly matter that much, because if it did, it would be like ChatGPT. It would have gone fully viral like ChatGPT, right? And everybody was using it for all kinds of things. Well, so these are the ways in which we don't help ourselves.
This is, just more evidence to me that America's kind of screwed. We're culturally screwed. We're creating an idiocracy. There is a handful of people that care enough and understand enough about crypto, but Travis is right. We've chased innovation offshore. They're going to continue to do so. No matter how the SEC Ripple case turns out, you look around the world and you see, they are talking about innovation. I just read today that Zimbabwe is creating a gold-backed crypto of some kind, for better or worse. I don't know, to try to stabilize their incredibly inflated Zimbabwean dollars, whatever those are called. Are they called Zimbabwe's? I don't know what they are.
I'm going to go with no, but I don't know for sure. I used to know that.
It's CBDCs that everybody's talking about, which is more control, which is more centralized, which is the very opposite of what crypto was intended to be. So why would you look at the US anymore, except for the creative geniuses that are helping to innovate and then going, well, we can't do this here, so we're going to go over there.
I mean, it is like, I did 2 tweets, I think, that went viral. One was on semiconductors and kind of saying the cognitive dissonance, meaning like this, the distortion around watching the US like desperately trying to get semiconductor manufacturers back on shore while either passively or actively pushing crypto innovators offshore is like absolutely wild to me, right? I mean, wild, because some of the smartest people in the world are crypto engineers. some of the smartest, most technical people in the entire world. And after they're done with crypto, their minds are not going to, they're going to go on to other things. I don't know what that thing is, but you want those people not here. That's really interesting. Okay. All right. Like people are people are people, brilliant people are brilliant people. They're going to go on and do really creative, innovative things in all kinds of spaces, and encouraging that innovation to be in a place, I think, is really powerful. So we're actively watching the UK, Lisbon, other countries be like, come here, please come here. We're going to make it France. Is like, it's so easy to come here and set up shop. Like, we're making it so Dublin, they're all like, just come on over, give it a try. The water's fine, whatever, right? Like, eat the brie. I mean, whatever it is, right? Like, they're like, come on over,
That's a great campaign.
We're not doing that at all. Exactly right. We're not doing that at all.
Brie.
Drink the real champagne. Forget sparkling wine. Come drink champagne. It's the whole thing, right? It's wild. And then the other thing I said was, it's almost like we're engaging in reverse brain drain. So, in reverse brain drain. So basically, like, my parents came here in the 60s under immigration rules that were like really offensively designed to only get like highly educated people, from India. And there's a reason that a lot of folks that look like me with my background, one generation removed, are, went to these colleges, all because we had super highly educated parents that were selectively chosen from other countries, right? We're almost now doing the opposite. We're like, see ya, bye. It's like, what? And other countries are kind of recognizing that, hey, this strategy really worked for the US for a long time, right? We brought a ton of huge brains, et cetera, that kind of thing here under very discriminatory immigration policies. And then we like leverage that and whatever. And then we created this whole H-1B. And we could go on about immigration and what a challenge it is.
Was it discriminatory or was it just exclusive because they wanted the smartest people to come over?
I think I think those are flip sides of the same thing, right?
I don't want the dumbest people to come to my country. Right? You don't want that.
When you're hiring for a company, you don't go, okay, send me the shittiest person you have and I want to hire them.
I think it's about who's allowed to come. We can have a whole conversation about this, because then they want to bring their family, right? That's understandable and important. We made that really complicated, right? So all these things are very disruptive to people and communities. Now we're seeing the opposite. So Biden's new immigration orders are actually saying, and they're being supported by industry, not crypto industry, all over the country, are folks who are like, we need labor. We need people to come in and like help us with agriculture, help us with manufacturing, help us with retail. Like, we need this labor force desperately. And so now you're seeing the Biden administration with the support of like tremendous support of industry being like, everybody come on over. And it's the exact opposite, because we don't have enough folks that are taking the jobs that are at the other end of the pay scale, right? Meanwhile, our technical minds are offshoring. So Electric Capital did this developer report. They do it every year, and they're kind of tracking the growth or lack thereof, right, of where development's actually happening, meaning software development, where people are actually submitting code changes on GitHub, where that comes from. And the observation, and you can look this up on their Twitter or on their website or somewhere, I'm sure, is that over time, it's less and less in the US. Like, it's more and more that these technical code commits are actually coming from other places. And that is anecdotally observable because people are hiring in other places as well as the technical talent moves. Now, it's not to say that it's not critical. Again, I'm a lawyer. So there's a lot of other folks that go into making a business that are not technical. But without that talent, you can't start a tech company without tech talent, right? You can start all kinds of companies, and that's great. But if you want to start a crypto company, you need people that can code, right? In this, like, that understand the blockchain, that can, right? Like, that's what you need. And if they're not here, then it's challenging to build a company around them when all your talent is kind of offshore. And that's what we're seeing happen as the first wave, I think, of these companies starting to move their other talent, their business, their legal, their marketing, their all that stuff, right? Moving that offshore as well.
Yeah. There's a great book that I read called The Network State, right? And so it's like we've almost moved beyond the traditional political states and the national borders where we could sort of, it's like, oh, my people might be some over here, there's some over there, there's some over there, and we're going to be building some awesome thing, but we're kind of aligned, and national borders don't necessarily matter, right? In the future, it would almost seem like this could be the case. Now, obviously, nationalism is pretty strong, and here's these imaginary borders that I can't seem to see from space, but it says you can't go past this one or you're bad, right? America seems to have their bottom border just wide open. Anybody can come in they want. However, it's really impossible for people to come in legally, right? Like my girlfriend, she's Russian. You know how hard it is for her to try to even if we were to get married, it's going to be hard for her to even come over here. And then, as you said, that reverse brain drain. You got these great people that are going elsewhere, building amazing companies, doing amazing stuff. And then here in America, we're almost going to get bypassed because of some of the reverse brain drain, also the innovation leaving the shore, and then BRICS, right? With the U.S. dollar seems to be teetering on the edge of relevancy because all these countries around the world no longer are buying dollars before they're buying oil, right? So now BRICS countries are getting really strong. So it seems to me, and actually I just saw this data point late last week, was that BRICS economic wise is 32 point something percent of the global GDP, whereas America and the West is only 29% GDP. So the G7 versus BRICS, BRICS is getting stronger, G7's getting weaker. Like here we are. This is where we are in civilization right now.
Yeah. Here's the thing. So as somebody who again has worked globally, who's got family all over the world, look at the demographics alone. Like forget anything about policy and anything else, right? Immigration policy is a giant disaster all over the world in my personal view. I personally think family reunification is critically important. You can't have a society only made up of one class of person. You can't have just technical people. You can't have just wealthy people. You can't just educate. You have to have all kinds of people to make up a society. That's just a fact. We may like it or not like it and have our political views about it, but that's just reality, right? Like someone's got to do all the things and not everyone's going to be able to do all the things, and people have different skills and talents. So
everybody's not inherently equal. They have different skills.
People have different skills and talents that are all important and all make up a functioning society.
Sure.
Now, all that being said, look at the demographics. There are some countries where it's getting younger and younger, and some where people are getting older and older. Okay, that is just a reality as well. And so the birth rates and this and that are not equal around the world. So when you look at the biggest markets in the world and where they're up and coming, there's a reason the Chinese and Russians are investing tremendously in Africa, in LATAM, in certain countries in ASEAN, right? There are younger populations there. And in many parts of like the Nordic North or whatever, like it's either zero or net negative growth. Japan is emblematic of this. They have the biggest issues that they've been dealing with for a lot of time here as well, right? Like in terms of figuring out, like, as their population gets older and older, how do they accommodate and adjust their society to accommodate that? They think a lot about mobility and accessibility and other issues, right? Because like they have an older population. And you see other parts of the world that are moving there as well. So there is a demographic change that's really coming upon us. The world has never been, the world is majority minority if you look at it from a US lens, which I do sometimes and other times not. If you look at this globally, you got to take into consideration just the pure demographics. The other thing you got to take into consideration is how tech forward a lot of different cultures are. You look at Asia, you look at LATAM, you look again at Africa. People are super tech forward, right? Like, the US is kind of not. I mean, we're just not at the cutting edge of technology usage. And we pretend we are because it's weird that we're not, because so much innovation has been based out of Silicon Valley and New York and Texas, a couple of places, right? In the US. But the reality is that like when you go to like China or India or Vietnam or Philippines or Colombia, like it's just a totally different engagement with technology that is much more fluid than we have here in the US.
Is it because we focus on the wrong things here? It's like we're so concerned about DEI versus true innovation in some cases, right? It's like that's the most important. Like people will come in, CEO, I'm going to make sure that, and then their company falls apart, but they're like, well, we're super inclusive now.
So I would actually say it's the exact opposite. I actually think that when you look at the communities in the United States that are more tech savvy, they're often poorer communities of color. Like those are the folks who embrace crypto the most. You look at the demographics of who owns crypto, it's a bunch of Black and brown folk. Like that's who's really embracing crypto. Why is that? Because legacy systems haven't worked for them more than anybody else. So if you just look at the sheer numbers, it's actually the opposite, right? So I actually think that part of the problem in the US is that there hasn't been enough user focus on some of these communities that are really inclined to use this stuff. I'll tell you, every single app that I use on a regular basis that was not literally about getting services in the city of San Francisco, okay? Like whatever, like things that are like literally how to get a thing from a place to a place in the city. All of my chat apps, everything, my cousins in India were using it at least a year before any of my friends in the US. at least a year, if not 2 years before. So none of this stuff was new to me because my cousins were like, oh, hey, like boomer, like, and I'm only a couple years older than them, right? They're like, hey, boomer, we're using WhatsApp or whatever the hell. And I was like, what the hell is WhatsApp? And they're like, oh, it's this like messaging. And I'm like, what? I'm like, don't you SMS? They're like, who the hell uses SMS? And I was like, what are you talking about? There's just a totally, I don't know how, it's so different. And it's so, and a lot of Black and brown folks, have family in these places, right? Or they have like some connection or they, whatever it is. And so the familiarity, the willingness to kind of give it a try, you're actually finding that in a lot of these communities more than you're finding it in kind of like other parts of the country. And I think that's something that kind of gets missed in this. So, leaving aside all of the sort of internal politics of any company's culture, I feel like part of the challenge has been a lot of these systems were not designed to actually be inclusive enough of communities that would have quickly adopted them. And so they've kind of left those folks out. And then other places where people did have that kind of mindset, it blew up there. And then it kind of comes back to the US. You know what I'm saying? So that's a very common path. I have a bunch of friends who are like startup founders and whatnot. I have for like decades here. And a lot of them are like, okay, I'm going to proto in the US and then I'm going to really alpha and like blow the thing up in wherever it is. And it's always
Southeast
like
Asia is the place to do it.
Definitely not.
Yeah,
It's definitely,
right.
it's never, ever, ever here. It's
Right.
always somewhere else.
It's
right?
like the last place I made that comment recently that it's like, because I'm working on a project and I was like, you know what? I'm going to launch this thing over in Southeast Asia and then bring it to America like Jimi Hendrix did. Jimi Hendrix was an amazing guitar player. He was in America. Nobody cared about him. He went to Britain, became awesome.
It's
and then
like
he came
basketball players, right? They go play in like Italy or whatever, and then they come on back. It's kind of like there's just this appetite for, I don't know, stuff that we just don't give credit to other countries for. But there's really like this ease of it, and we think just because some of that stuff is developed here, people are trained here at our school or whatever it is, that means that the user base is ready to do it. And like, we'll just kind of jump in. And we don't really have that. We're kind of a very stodgy culture when it comes to being digital about stuff, right? Like, it's really interesting. The other reason why I think you see a lot of this stuff start with gamers. Like gamers are definitely more of that kind of mindset, right? They'll try a different thing. They're kind of familiar. They're online and offline. They have that intermediate reality. It's also why like artists and Hollywood, like culture, people like that, like TV, film, you see a lot of the stuff happening there as well. Like adoption of like new cameras often happens with studios in Hollywood, right? In indies, because they're like, oh, we'll try this new thing. We'll get an, it's never like the random Joe and Jane and whatever randomville, who are doing it, right? They're like the last adopters, right? And our politicians, politicians look at those folks, many of our politicians look at those folks and they think like that is indicative of the broader American society. And it's kind of not in a way, I hate to say it that way, but it's kind of like, we need to get it together, I think, on multiple axes. And we need to recognize that we are, to the points I think that you're kind of making more broadly, we're behind a lot of other places in the world on a number of different axes. And so the policy, to kind of like land this point, policy around crypto in the United States, and if we're really honest about it, in my opinion, it kind of mirrors American society, right? Like if people don't like you don't get good policy. You know what I'm saying? And so it's an interesting kind of time to think about this. Whereas if like it's something people are using all the time, then everyone's like, well, of course we should be thinking about how to, be friendly to it or whatever. The orientation is completely different and the mindset's completely different when you have a society that is always trying to embrace, that kind of thing and be at that forefront. And I don't know that is outside of certain pockets in the US, I don't know that is something I would necessarily say about my country, which I love. And I love, obviously I'm born and raised Native American, but like, it's just really challenging. And I should correct that if you'll let me. Born and raised in America, we will
let you,
but it's just
we'll allow it.
Challenging.
Politics.
I'm not actually Native American.
Politics lives downstream of culture, and our culture, being led by academia and entertainment, there's a lot of bad stuff, and of course in the US it starts in California and then it moves across the country, and people get so fed up in California that they leave and take the same failed politics that made them leave California to these other states. I hate that we're dunking so much on this country, but let's face it, we're screwed. So unless there's
optimistic in that. I mean, I'm an optimist, and call me crazy, but like and maybe the part of this is because this is kind of my job is to like to, I don't know, save us or whatever, but like that sounds too lofty and obnoxious, but like, part of us is to kind of help make this case and do some education around this stuff.
And I think that's possible. I think you can in pockets, but unless we have a massive change, a cleaning house of our government and the forces that have become so corrupt in America, it's going to be really challenging. So let's take the focus off America. And what I want to hear is some of the amazing things that you're seeing happen, some of the profound advances that are taking place. Is where are they happening? What's got your attention? You're like, this is how we need to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much happening that's so exciting. I mean, I think that, well, actually, let me say this in a different way, because I actually want to stay with America for a second, because despite the frame we the turn this took, I think there is a lot of stuff happening here I think is really exciting, right? And that's true in the policy space as well. So like literally today, as the day we're recording rather, there are 2 bills coming up in the California legislature that I think are important and interesting. So one is on how to codify protections around DAOs. So how can we give DAOs some protection so that people that are engaging in a DAO have a little bit more, understanding of what they are and aren't doing, and we're not like opening up a lot of like real estate for like problems to come down the line. I think that's really interesting. There's also some discussion happening on a possible licensing regime in California that is nuanced and complicated, et cetera. But the fact that California is kind of saying we want to be a place where companies have rules and can come and do business, I think is an interesting sign, right? It's kind of a positive thing. And so despite the fact that at our federal government level, there's a lot of complexity in this current political environment, we have bicameral, we have Republicans and Democrats, anytime you have a split Congress, like not a lot gets done. And that has nothing to do with crypto. It's just in general, it's very hard to get legislation passed when you've got, the 2 parties each having a chamber of Congress, right? I mean, for reasons that are hopefully really obvious. That means a lot of activity is going to the states. And that's really actually very interesting. Because what you're seeing is a bunch of states jockeying to be kind of like the place that a lot of this stuff happens, right? Now, there's a lot of reasons why people start a company in a place, okay? And they have to do with like the labor force, the labor laws, the weather, whatever it is, all kinds of things, right? Access to universities and all their family, whatever it is. But I think in crypto, you're going to see folks that actually want to be in places where there are rules that they can then use and kind of say, here are rules that actually do exist. We are going in compliance with these rules. We are working to get, et cetera, right? Whether these things pass, whether we actually support them or not is an open question. It's going through this process right now. People are putting amendments in, fixing things, blah, blah, blah. So there's a long way to go. But the activity at the state level gives me a lot of hope, because I do feel like in the absence of federal stuff, that there's lots of conversations happening. All it's really important. But I do think the states are getting really into this business, as it were. And then in Europe, just earlier this week, we had the final passage of MiCA legislation, markets in crypto assets. And so that is a fairly comprehensive regime. It's not perfect. It's got some challenges, but I would say, I mean, it is. I've been working with / tracking that thing for like 5 years. And here's the comedy. I mean, if you think it's hard to get stuff passed in the US, it's like so hard to get stuff passed in Europe. Like the process and bureaucracy is like mind blowing. Ask me how I know. But they got it done, and they got it done there's way before the US, right? This thing is landed. So now it moves to what's called implementation, which is each country is like, well, now we have this kind of like framework. So what do we do with it? And the internal jockeying is starting. As I mentioned, countries in Europe are like, yes, we want this innovation. We want it to come here. We want the builders. We want all this stuff. And like, Europe's not a bad place to live, right? I mean, the food's good. The weather's generally fine. So we're seeing some folks who are talking about this, in fact, very publicly. And some major companies are now saying, oh, we had like an outpost in one of these countries. Now we're kind of thinking about, should we be going bigger in those spaces, right? And it's fascinating watching that happen. So that makes me feel excited. I also think there's a lot happening out of the Gulf. Now the Gulf is often, people I think dismiss the Gulf because they're like, oh, there's so much money and they just kind of throw it around and do silly things. But like, there's actually a bunch of really interesting things happening, not just out of the UAE, but also like Oman's been paying attention for a long time. There's work happening out of other countries in the region as well that I think are paying a lot of attention. So that's going to be something to watch. And then, of course, you've got Brazil, and Brazil is basically trying to establish itself among the BRIC nations as perhaps the one that is not as big of a threat to the United States, which Russia and China clearly, are, and India is kind of in its own head right now. So that's been really interesting to watch as well, and some of the work happening there. And again, Brazil is a giant market, right? There's a ton of people in Brazil. It's a huge country. And so there's a lot to be said for how it's going to set the tone across South and Central America in terms of, the work it's going to do. Now, something else I think is really interesting is, of course, Brazil and Lisbon are both Portuguese-speaking countries. Lisbon, as I think you probably are well aware, has become a massive hub for kind of Web3. It basically has the weather of San Francisco. It's very easy to live there. It's a beautiful country.
It's the west coast of Europe. It's the west coast of Europe.
The west coast of Europe. It's stunning. It's just a lovely place. Gorgeous. And so there are so many people that are doing stints there, or even moving there, right? And for a little while,
and some of them make it easy to sort of be an immigrant there, right? It's almost like
they basically created a whole set of processes. These are, from what I understand, are now no longer in play. But the last couple of years during the pandemic, they were kind of like, come to Portugal, come and live here. We're going to make it ridiculously super easy to come and do that. Right. And they did. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for tracking that corridor and that relationship. Now, it's a fraught relationship between Portugal and Brazil for a variety of reasons, but nevertheless, you're seeing investment in the universities there, right? And when you speak Portuguese, it's not that hard to go down and help with, so all of these corridors, I think, are really important. Now, you mentioned the BRIC countries, and I think it's a lot of folks, I think, underestimate the geopolitics of all this and how important that is. Okay. So you've got China and Russia in this. Are they allies? Are they not? What's going on? You had this thing that I saw I got a bunch of texts about it too, just about how China is not explicitly, they're respecting the Crimean border, but kinda and not really. And it's a little awkward.
I heard that one of the guys said, all of the former Soviet Union countries aren't completely sovereign.
I mean, oh my God. And that was that was, of course, disavowed by the government. So it's complicated, but there's a lot going on there, right? And then you've got India. And so one of the things I think, I was shocked how underreported this was, but PM Modi only really had one party that was kind of a balancing force, if you will, which is the Congress Party. And so Rahul Gandhi, who was the, totemic head of that party, was basically ousted from his position, which is bananas. And so now there really isn't any hedge against Modi, who's been in power for a very long time, right? There are accusations that the elections are not fully democratic. All this, my knowledge.
Well, that's the conversation worldwide. When you
it's wild. It's wild. So when you look at these giant, powerful countries, nuclear countries with massive populations, young populations, very tech savvy, extremely smart, absolutely no qualms about doing whatever has to be done very quickly to get policies put in place to make people use tech. Look no further than India and the way they rolled out UPI basically almost overnight, right? All these things just kind of compound the challenges we have. Now, I am not in any way suggesting that the US should turn into some sort of autocracy that's everyone must use a technology, blah, blah. That's the opposite of what I think any of us want. But when you are functioning in an actual democracy, that is a functioning true democracy, it's hard, right? It's hard to get consensus on things. It's hard to get agreement on things. It is hard. Part of the beauty of our process, to kind of do the flip of everything we've been saying so far, is that our process is challenging. And in theory, that should result in better decision-making. But that decision-making can be slower, right? It can be less efficient. It can be all the reasons why we're centralized intermediaries are really challenging. They put friction into systems, right? So in a place like in India or a China where there's a person who can be do this thing and it just happens, you don't really have that challenge. But that's not the world I think that I want to live in. I want to have a democracy that is actually pure in some ways and that really reflects the will and views of participants. It's why I'm so into DAOs, right?
We want an election, not a selection. And now we're to the point where they're saying, oh yeah, you know what? We don't need to debate you guys anymore. And it's wow, okay. And so that's some American politics. I'm not going to go down that. But I did find this chart today that was really interesting, and I can actually put this in the show notes. Leadership in key technologies is increasingly contested, and it's showing which technologies China's leading in, and they're leading in advanced batteries and commercial drones. 5G is becoming more contested. US is leading in internet platforms, synthetic biology, fusion energy. Quantum computing is becoming more contested. Biopharmaceuticals is becoming more contested.
Yeah.
And ones that are contested right now, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, next gen networks, and AI between the US and between China. And then the one thing that Europe has is regulation, which is funny because everybody's cracking jokes on Europe because, oh, they just like to regulate things. What are you going to innovate, right? But I didn't see blockchain. I assume blockchain is maybe next gen networks or internet platforms or something. I don't necessarily know that. But there's a big divide that's starting to happen with these technologies as China and BRICS becomes stronger and America and the West become weaker. Like, this is an interesting time to be alive for sure.
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you a story that really changed my views on regulation. Okay. Because I was definitely of a mind of like, oh, I'm still of this mind. Like, I call it premature regulation. Like, you don't want to regulate something too soon because the market's going to like decide a bunch of stuff, and like a lot of things are just going to die. So it's like, why? On some levels, like, why bother? Right. But also, you want to make sure you're regulating something in a very forward-thinking way. And that's hard to do. I mean, policy is always going to lag tech innovation. That's just kind of a fact. And tech innovation is getting faster and faster and faster. And policy making takes time. That's just also fair. So a lot of folks, and we supported this, part of what I was doing at the World Economic Forum was thinking about different mechanisms of policy making that could accommodate the reality that tech is always going to move faster than policy. So how do you get to a place where you're still keeping consumers safe and you're still protecting innovation, but you're not just like allowing the Wild West or whatever, but you're saying like within some boundary, there's got to be like some things that are just kind of like yes and no. Like there's got to be some bright lines, right? To some extent. Anyway, so one of those was kind of this idea of sandboxes. And a sandbox, for those who don't know, is kind of a regulator says, okay, come in, collaborate with us, show us what you're doing. We're going to give you, a long leash essentially on stuff. In some cases, there might even be a safe harbor that during the time you're in the sandbox, we're not going to come after you and find you, whatever it is, right? There's all kinds of ways of setting it up. And I said to a couple of friends who are entrepreneurs, hey, sandboxes sound awesome. Don't you want to be in a sandbox? And one of my good friends said to me, she's like, no, I don't want to be in the sandbox. She was absolutely, I don't want to be in the effing sandbox, right? Like, I want to be absolutely kosher 100% within the rules. Like, I want to come in and have a license. So if I have a license, then I know exactly what's expected of me and I'm not accidentally building on something that's going to evaporate. Because yes, maybe in the sandbox, I don't get like fined or, shackles slapped on me or whatever for doing something that's just natural to my business. But I also don't know if my business is being built on air or quicksand. Like, I don't know.
Right. Kind of like what Coinbase has been doing. They're like, hey, we're trying to be within your lines, but
right.
you keep you keep moving the goalposts.
So it's like, unless you have that certainty, this is why we talk about a lot about regulatory certainty, right? Regulatory clarity. Unless you know, okay, all well and good, you're not going to get like slapped with a fine or whatever. But like, if the operational cost of transitioning into something else that develops because of your goodwill puts you out of business, you're still screwed, right? So the market economics of things like sandboxes don't always make sense. And that's why in the US, you hear all this repeated call for regulatory clarity, regulatory clarity. That means clear rules. We understand, what does a regulator want from us? What is our reporting requirement? What are our licensing requirements? What are our operational requirements? What all of these things. And nobody wants to be like too hemmed in and constrained because then you can't innovate. But you want to at least have some sense of what's the operational burden going to be on my business. Because if the answer is like, I don't know, then that might kill my business a couple of years from now. And you're kind of seeing this with some of these folks who are now saying, it looks like it's going to be maybe a couple more years where the US gets rules in place. Aren't I better off spending my money transitioning to an HQ where I know what the rules are and just running, as opposed to like waiting around and trying to see, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't really know. And that's what folks in this industry have been saying for a very long time. So what I love about, just loop all the way back around, about this DAO legislation proposal is that it's because we're still early in DAOs, right? So it's providing some of that. It's not saying like, hey, make it up or we'll guess. It's kind of saying like, these are what we think the basic rules are. And so operate in this way. And you're like, great. Okay, that is something I can work with. Now I understand. And what this proposal is actually doing is leveraging existing laws and saying these things make sense in some way, right? So like, let's do that. But then opening them up to say where they don't make sense, let's just kind of modify that. So rather than this brand new thing that everyone's like, what the hell is that? It's like, here is a way to leverage something that everybody knows and everyone's like, sure, fine, whatever. And saying, how do we open that up and create a container or some space for the unique properties of a DAO that no one's ever seen before, right? That no one knows how to wrestle with. That's the kind of stuff I think makes a lot of sense. And I'm hopeful that at least some of the governance and those kinds of things will be very encouraged to stay onshore in the US, even if some of the sort of mechanics around exchanges and things like that one piece of our very big ecosystem do wind up moving more offshore.
I will willingly join you in optimism because I would love for that to happen. I just, observing how things have been, just it. Thank you for lifting that up there.
Yeah, well, it's like a cycle. You caught me on an optimistic day. There's days that I'm like,
I'm curious about. I want to know about your day. There's got to be all kinds of variety. What does a typical day in the life of Sheila Warren look like?
Oh, Lord. Well, yeah, I mean, I would not necessarily wish a typical day in my life on anyone. But it's a lot. That's why I'm up super early because, of course, I'm dealing with like what's happening in Europe, what's happening on the East Coast. I live in California, although I'm traveling all the time. So a typical day when I'm not traveling, which is unusual, is I'm up, I'm kind of doing a lot of reading. I am scrolling through Twitter because we get a lot of our news from Twitter, let's be real, in this industry and in this space. I'm reviewing, bills that might be coming up. I'm like responding, all the stuff you do as the CEO of a company, right? A lot of it is that kind of stuff, but it's also just tracking what's happening on the East Coast and in Europe specifically. Then I move into internal kind of team meetings where I'm checking in with my executive team, with other folks. We've got like, oh, we're commenting on this, we're moving on this, or we have to make a decision about that, or a hire, or whatever it is, right? Like business stuff, very typical. I run a small business after all, so very typical small business stuff. I try to reserve time in my day for reading, but these days it's just a lot of talking to reporters, unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, but it's a lot of press lately because a lot of reporters have a lot of questions, and that's global. So I might be talking to somebody in, Hong Kong or in Berlin or in, wherever it is, right? But also a bunch of folks in the US as well, just to get a sense of like, what's top of mind, or there's stories coming out all the time, or trying to kind of make sure we're responsive to that. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. And then finally in my afternoon is when I get a little more time to read. So that I'm kind of like sitting down and like reading, new things, trying to keep up on the tech, which, as you both know, is like almost impossible in this space, right?
He's got ChatGPT just summarizing all your news articles for you.
Yeah, not yet, right? It's wild. But I feel like that's kind of one of the things I'll tell you that's really challenging about this role versus my last role is, part of my job, I think, is to actually have my finger on all those pulses and really be able to synthesize at a different level what's going on, right? And that's why I think I was so effective in my last role and why I'm so effective in this one. But that takes time, right? You've got to have the inputs to form those views. And so spending a lot of time reading and really just kind of looking around and reading outside of crypto, by the way, reading on all kinds of other things that are happening. Again, the geopolitics are so important, and a lot of folks miss that, or they aren't sophisticated enough and haven't spent enough time thinking about it to understand what these things actually mean, So looking at some of those things, I think, is really important for me. Talking to a bunch of just contacts in and outside of crypto, in broader tech and fintech, is really important as well to get a read on things. But right now, let's be real. In the United States, we're playing a lot of defense. We are not a popular, industry right now. And a lot of that is due to one particular individual, he who shall not be named, et cetera. But like a lot of it is because I think we didn't do a great job, like I said, with early on with until NFTs, honestly, with like things like user interfaces and with things like safety and security and prioritizing that and very openly prioritizing that, right? Like,
so easy for some people to do rug pulls, right? And it's like
it's way too easy, right?
Even big huge things like FTX and that whole scenario where that guy was the guy who was working with with Gensler to write the regular. Really, it's like having the fox writing the rules for the hen house, saying, "Okay, and we're going to leave the door."
Look, we are still dealing with the massive crater that the FTX asteroid slammed into Washington. Okay, and that is a long process.
Wasn't that
understandably
an FTX asteroid?
So. There it is, right? Yeah, exactly, right. That is a long process, and I think people can be as pissed off as they want to be, and I wasn't part of it. Fine, yeah, it's okay. None of us were in that group of 4 people who made those terrible decisions that were sociopathic. Fine, doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, he was showing up. He was showing up in Washington. He was pounding the pavement. He was doing the calls. He was taking the meetings. He was writing the chat. He was doing all that stuff. And, not that many other people were. And so I think a lot of folks, like, they feel burned by that. And that is a very understandable thing. And so we can be outraged by it and we can we'll pound the pavement. But like the bottom line is like, that's a thing that happened. And it has a massive effect. Like when I use asteroid and crater, I'm not being hyperbolic. I mean,
for sure.
Like it's a really, really big deal.
And it would seem to me, Sheila, that if he was really an enemy of the state, of having gone through that, if he hadn't gone and pounded the pavement in DC, he'd be in prison. Like he got out of the Bahamas and immediately 4 days before Christmas, he was on a first-class flight to go hang out in Palo Alto or wherever his parents live, right? Like that would not have happened if he had not been pounding the pavement in DC, paying off all these politicians, frankly.
I mean, I have no idea. I cannot say that I track criminals and their behavior and how they're treated. You know what I mean? But all I can say is there has certainly been an epidemic, it feels like to me, of like wunderkind, young folks who are making, criminal decisions, right? I mean, there's all of these, like, what were they saying? Like the Forbes 30 under 30, it's like some percentage almost like over the last 5 years, every year has been like criminals. And it's like, what the, so I think that is far more about how we as a society like really have this bias towards, youth and energy and all this, and that's all well and good. But like, what young people don't have is a fully developed prefrontal cortex. Right. Mm-hmm. And that means you make dumb decisions. I mean, I was once 22 and I was an idiot. Okay. I might have been a very smart idiot on one axis, but I was an idiot on another axis because I was 22 years old. You know what the hell you're doing? So,
but you think you do.
You absolutely think you do. You
self-righteousness and beyond.
That point, infallible, right? Like you truly believe that you are arrogant. That is called being 22 years old, or 25, whatever it is now. Whatever. I am not those things.
It's 39 now.
You tell me, isn't it 55? Who the hell? Whatever it is, right? And so we kind of like celebrate this and we give people prizes and awards and there's so many, and in some cases that's absolutely true. In some cases it is nonsense. It is nonsense. The other thing that's happening in our society, that if you want to talk about this as well, is, we proxy things now. So we're like, oh, because you were on the cover of whatever magazine and because you hang out with so-and-so, you must be a good egg. You must be like a brilliant person who does all the, like we have these assumptions. And is anyone actually doing the diligence anymore? I mean, I don't,
good point.
I try to, but it's like, it's hard, right? So this is
well, clearly you did it because you showed up on Bad Crypto.
Well, here it is.
again,
twice.
Fool me once, shame on.
But here's this, and to get back to that though, this is why I feel so strongly and passionately about our space, about DAOs, about on-chain action, about all these things that enable us to hold each other accountable, to create transparency, to do certain things in a way that, like, the first books written about blockchain were about trust and the erosion of trust in our society. That's only gotten worse, not better, guys, right?
Right.
So here is a proposal to how we can solve not all of that, but at least address it in a more honest way, using some of this revolutionary technology. So, like I say, I think we've gotten in our culture, in our government, in our media, in our tech, in our industry, in our funding, in all of these things, we have to question what is real and what is not real. And so what I love about our space is like, we're trying to make that an easier, more accurate thing to do. So there you have it. That's kind of my take on these things. It's a long road ahead of us here in the US, but the global scene is very rosy. It is very optimistic. It is very positive. People love the technology. They love the opportunity. They may not fully understand it, but they get that there is something really important happening here. They get how it connects to AI. They get how it connects to AR. Like, they understand that, right? And some of that, going back in our conversation, is because in other places, policymakers tend to be either technically minded or have a tech advisor they trust who's not coming from, some other place. Like they that's a person that they know and they trust and whatnot. So that's helpful. We don't have that as much, I think here. It's why there are some members of Congress who are technical, who do understand stuff a lot, who ask very, very sophisticated questions. But there are a lot who they just don't know this stuff. They know other stuff that's really important too, right? They know about, housing policy or, taxes or whatever it is, right? They know other things. No one can know everything. part of our challenge is helping to make the case that this does matter, that it's not that every other country in the world is like full of idiots. It's that they're seeing something that America has become blind to for a variety of reasons. And we need to help pull some of that, the layers of, whatever it is away from people and kind of allow them to see what's really going on here. And I take that responsibility extremely seriously. And it's something that I remain hopeful about, even as, I've been saying for a while, no one's waiting for the US to land the plane. Like everyone else, their plane's in flight. They like know where they're going. They're like, these are the rules. You might love them or hate them, but here's what they are. And in the US, we're like, roads? Who needs roads? It's just kind of like, it's just crazy. It's wild.
I think that is a great place to put a period for punctuation on this talk. This is tons of great info. Sheila, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you and interact with you, ask questions and learn more?
Yeah, come on to Twitter for a while it lasts. I'm still findable there. It's at Sheila_Warren or the Crypto Council. You can always ping us there if you have questions. We have a lot of info on our website, a lot of explainers about how policy is made, including both in Europe and in the US. If you have questions about how does it work, we have explainers there for those who might be interested. And I guarantee you'll have something to learn. That's not how you think.
Thank you so much.
I'll tell you what, if we didn't cut off Sheila, then she's like the ever ready bunny. She just keep going and going and going. And the moment we stop, she's like, oh, I got another call I need to be on. So it's a good thing.
If you noticed near the end of the thing, she was like, she kept saying little nuggets. And I was like, there's the end. And then she goes, and then, and it's like, oh, it's not. So I was like,
that's the end.
That was good.
She was not aware. The last time we had her on the show was in April of 2020, before Blockchain Heroes. And she was not aware that we commemorated her by with a hero called the Emissary. This was a hero in our original 50 Blockchain Heroes that was inspired by Sheila Warren. And you got your common, your uncommon, your rare, epic, legendary, the mythic, secrets, the secret smoke, there's the golden, and of course the what do we call the enchanted. And she also, I forgot, she went on to also be in the Upland collectible series, because all of the Blockchain Heroes were made into these Upland block explorers. And if you got the mythic, which is the yellow one, you could actually import that into the Upland game and use that block explorer. By the way, had some great conversations recently with Duck from Upland. I am convinced they are leading the metaverse right now. Without me doing my metaverse rant, they are number one. Their vision for what they're doing and where they're going is absolute tops. And if you're not in the Upland game yet, you should be. So Travis had a great idea. What was your great idea?
Eat corn.
Yeah, corn's a great idea. Corn's always a great idea.
Right? That's a good idea. I thought, hey, we should probably do an Emissary AI version like we've done with the other AI set that we did. We did 36 regular ones, and we had one of that. Then we dropped another one there of who was it? Baron somebody?
I was Van Hodling. Van Hodling. We did that.
Oh, Van Hodling. Yep. And then members, we should probably do one for the Emissary.
Yeah. So if you are a Bad Crypto Nifty Club member, and you got to be one pretty quick. I'm not exactly sure what day this episode is dropping, but within a few days of it dropping, you have to have one of these Bad Crypto Nifty.
Let's just say 72 clubs. Hours post this dropping.
Ish. I'm going to be on vacation, so don't hold me to an exact
84 hours, 102.
Badcrypto.uncut.network. Go and get one of these, because we drop all kinds of cool stuff. I mean, take a look here at some of the things that you would have missed. There's the Van Hodling energized variation that you would have gotten for free if you had the Bad Crypto Nifty. And there's a bunch of them that some of them from Cornytopia, some of them from other episodes. So you'll want to go to badcrypto.uncut.network, scroll to the bottom, pick up this Bad Crypto Nifty Club, and we'll make a nifty of the Emissary done by AI. It'll be super fun.
We've done over 40 different NFTs so far on that, so that's pretty cool. Yeah. So for the cost of 0.002 ETH, All the rest of those are just part of it. So you get to drop them and get those. But sometimes we'll create multiples. And so we'll drop just a rank. So you don't get every one of them. Sometimes you got to go into the platform and claim them. Like we just had all the people claim Captain Corn, and then we created a whole Corny Kingdom based on that, which we'll talk about in a future episode. So thank you so much for Sheila for coming on. Again, this was a really long episode, so we don't want to keep this going on for too long. So what should we tell them here to end it all, Mr. Joel?
Let's do like the Beatles, A Day in the Life, where we have an ending stay bad that goes on for like a minute.
Okay.
So thanks for listening, everybody, and stay bad. The Bad Crypto Podcast is a production of Bad Crypto LLC. The content of the show, the videos, and the website is provided for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice of any kind. You shouldn't make any decisions as to finances, investing, trading, or anything else based on this information without undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional financial advisor. Please understand that the trading of Bitcoins and alternative cryptocurrencies have potential risks involved. Anyone wishing to invest in any of the currencies or tokens mentioned on this podcast should first seek their own independent professional financial advisor. They see can't end on a D. A hard D doesn't keep resonating like a.
Sorry. This is all the resonating you get, folks. Suck it. That's really horrible. I apologize. Don't suck it.